During the midterm year of the president's second term, those presidents who are lucky enough to win a second term, this historically marks a low point of popularity for all presidents, for most presidents, I should say. Is there anything different here about the situation President Obama is in?
Well, one thing that's noticeably different is President Obama has sort of been what in Texas they call all hat and no horse. He's talked kind of a big game internationally. We're going to have a red line here, and even most recently on the Ukraine, there will be consequences for anyone who uses violence, etc. But then when you look at what he seems to actually be prepared to do, it's quite another story. So I think that's really aggravating his circumstance right here, right now, John, is that he seems to have made promises, the red line over chemical weapons in Syria being the obvious one, and then he's not really backing them up, and that's becoming a problem in the polls.
Now, President Obama has become kind of a hot potato for Democrats who are running for office in 2014, but do you think the issue of national security in a poll like this really matters in these local congressional races, maybe more so on a Senate race, but in these local congressional races, do you think the American public is concerned about that and that this might sway these elections more towards the Republican side?
I think like Benghazi, I think as with the NSA stuff, these are sort of secondary and tertiary issues that hang around the periphery. They may be a little more important in some states than others. One can imagine scenarios, for example, if there's an international crisis and once again the president finds himself around election time embroiled in something and the administration doesn't come off looking very good, it could be a problem. But overall, I think, Republicans don't even want foreign policy to be the main issue. Obviously,
they want
it to be Obamacare.
Exactly. That's that kind of gets to my question. Do you think this is something that Republican candidates will bring up as, hey, this person, candidate X, is aligned with President Obama, and you could expect more of the same on the foreign policy stage?
Well, I think where you may see that come out is they're going to point out the high percentage of times that Democratic senators in just about every state have voted with the president. So they're going to say, not only if you reelect this senator I'm running against, is he going to vote for policies like Obamacare, but look at all the other problems with the administration, and the senator that you now have representing you, he voted with the president 95–96% of the time. So if you want a rubber stamp for Obama, reelect my opponent. That's the kind of rhetoric you're going to hear in November.
And this was interesting as it relates to a profile piece I saw on NBC News over the weekend, profiling the Senate race in Kentucky. The Democratic candidate, Allison Grimes, was asked if she would want President Obama coming down to campaign on her behalf, and it was a non-answer at best. She doesn't want to embarrass the president on national television, but certainly not a full-throated say, hey, I'd love to have the president come down. Let's look at this even more in a historical context here. Now, if we look at our past two presidents, the current data does represent a personal low for President Obama, but not quite as low as the low that George W. Bush reached back in 2007, when only 21% of Americans thought world leaders respected President George W. Bush. Bill Clinton's ratings in 1994 and 2000 were similar to President Obama's. These are the actual approval, disapproval numbers for the president here in the country, not specifically on this issue of foreign influence and respectability abroad. But I guess it shows that things are bad for President Obama, but they could get worse.
Well, they're bad for him. They could get worse. They could get better. I think one of the mistakes Republicans tend to make, John, is they tend to think that just because this president's approval ratings are in the cellar right now, and they are really bad, that there is nothing he could do to raise them up. I mean, just think if there's a vacancy on the Supreme Court. All of a sudden, all the focus is on President Obama because he has a huge decision of historical moment to make. So there's still time for this president to make a comeback. We're going to have to see what kind of policies he can do, and also what sort of arguments he can make in November. Because if he loses the Senate, then that's pretty much game, set, and match, I think.
Well, I can't wait to talk to you more about that. Coming up later, much later in the show, we'll have a look at this issue of the deficit and debt and how that could play to the Republicans' advantage this coming election cycle.